One of the most important parts of the photography process is editing. It's what makes a good photo great, a great photo fantastic, and your bad photos are always going to be bad. How's it going, guys? I'm Josh, and if you thought that this title was just clickbait, you are dead wrong. I'm going to do two things today. So first, I'm going to briefly walk you through my workflow through Photoshop and Lightroom, which are the two softwares I use to edit my photos. And then two, I'm going to teach you how to edit every photo ever. I know that sounds very ambitious. Basically, what I want to do is teach you how to teach yourself, because I can't make tutorials as fast as you can learn, and I don't want to stunt your growth in the photo world. So I'm going to teach you how to find all the tutorials you could ever need and actually teach yourself Lightroom and Photoshop. So let's get into this. Quick moment of relevant but still shameless self-promotion. I'm now selling prints of all the best photos I've ever taken up on my website. This is the 20 by 30, the biggest size, the 12 by 18, the medium size, and a lot of the photos I talk about editing in this video are up for sale on the site. Definitely go check it out. I think I just got a Tinder message. Link to the website right over here. Now for how I edit my photos, and I gotta admit, I've been nervous to make this video because I don't know if I'm doing it right. I taught myself how to use Lightroom and Photoshop, and I can definitely make my photos look pretty. I don't know if it's the proper way, but it works for me, and hopefully it'll work for you. For those of you who don't know, Lightroom is like Photoshop's cousin that's a little bit slimmer, more efficient, and better designed for editing photos. You can do a lot of the stuff you can do in Lightroom in Photoshop too, but Lightroom is just so much more efficient, and it's really nice to use. So my process is I'll edit 100% of my photos in Lightroom, and then every once in a while, maybe 5-10% of the time, I'll take it into Photoshop for some heavier processing work, like if I want to take a person out of the photo, or if I want to merge an HDR or a panorama, something more intensive, Photoshop comes in. But both of them make a really nice package deal. If you don't have them, I know they're a little bit pricey, but you can purchase them, links down below. Real quick, before we talk editing, the best format to shoot your cameras with on your DSLR is called RAW, and what RAW is it actually is the largest file size possible. It stores the most information, which lets you have more editing capability when you're in Photoshop and Lightroom. So if you haven't shot RAW up until now, it's not the end of the world. I do recommend starting shooting RAW from now on. Now that you have your photo, dump it into Lightroom, and the first thing you're going to want to do is start playing around with crop. So cropping, you can do a couple things. Cropping is not a way to make up for all your compositional mistakes. It's more a way to highlight what you meant to do and fix minor mistakes you may have made while shooting the actual photo. So what I'll do first is make sure that the horizon line and all the lines that are meant to be flat are flattened. So oftentimes you accidentally shoot your photo a little crooked, it happens, and then you can start to crop inward. Maybe you have a person that walked in at the side of the frame and you just don't want that person in the shot. Don't be afraid to crop in and get that guy out of there. You can also sometimes, if you have too much information above and below and you really all the action is in the center of the photo, maybe try a 16:9 crop ratio. And this is something that I recommend thinking about before you actually take your photo. Another super useful tool that's not in the crop department but very similar to it is called lens correction, and if you scroll down in the bar to the right you'll find it. And basically what lens correction does is sometimes you're shooting a building or anything and it looks like it's leaning really far backwards, and that's called keystoning, and you can fix that very easily by playing with the vertical adjustment bar and making it look like it was shot at the right angle and it's right side up. At this point you have your photo cropped and aligned to how you want it, and now it's just a matter of playing with the colors until it looks great, and that's much easier said than done. So you have a lot to work with. The first thing I like to do is make sure the exposure is adequate. So if it got a little bit too bright and you need to darken it a little bit, bring that down, bring it up, whatever you have to do. And sometimes it helps just to take the bar and slide it really far over in both directions, just to have an idea of what you're working with. So after you've done exposure, contrast is pretty important. I like to bump the contrast just a little bit in most of my photos because it also really helps, makes it a little sharper. And something to note is it helps to have an idea of what you want out of your photo before you start editing, because if you're just screwing around until it looks cool, it's going to take forever. If you have a vision, it'll be much easier. The shadow and highlight section is really important because oftentimes a lot of information is stored in these that you don't actually see it come out until you tweak with the bars. And that sounds very confusing and vague, but you'll understand what I mean once you play around with it. Sometimes you'll have a photo that's super dark and you raise the shadows and suddenly you find that you have so much more information in the photo than you ever expected. So definitely play with those and see what you got. I also really like to bump the clarity up just because It makes the photo look sharp, it looks cool. I'm a sucker for high clarity, but that's just my personal editing style. Whites and blacks really just experiment with. Sometimes I like to bring the black bar really far low to give it a nice dramatic dark feel, but it really just depends what you're going for. Now for the coloring of the photo, I typically try avoiding the saturation bar. I'll raise it a little bit sometimes, but it can get kind of messy. I prefer to work with vibrance because it's a little bit less obnoxious and still makes a photo beautiful. After that, I usually play with temperature a little bit, and temperature you can use to make your photo look proper, like the actual temperature that it should look, or you can try making it a little cooler or a little bit warmer. Really just experiment and notice how it'll give the photo a totally different feel if you make it very yellow as opposed to very blue. And sometimes the green and purple tint bar is just a good way of fixing the lighting. I don't really play with this too much unless it's off when I shot the photo. Once all of this is settled, if you scroll down the bar to the right, you'll find the HSL tab, and this is great for actually coloring with individual colors. And sometimes you'll have a photo and everything's great in it, you don't want to saturate it anymore, but the reds are just a little bit lacking, so you can actually bring up the saturation of just the reds, or you can make the oranges a little more red. All of this stuff is all done in the HSL tab, and it's just a matter of experimenting with it until you find what you're really looking for. If you scroll down a little further in the bar to the right, you'll find the effects tab, and what I really like in here is adding a little bit of vignetting to the photo. It makes for a nice dramatic feel, and it looks good. I usually do it to most of my photos. So what I like to choose is highlight priority style, and then just bring the bar a little bit over to the right until you have a nice dramatic feel. The trick to the perfect vignetting, if it's obvious, then it doesn't look great. All right. At this point, I threw that harder than I should have. At this point, there are more complex things you can do, like selecting only certain parts of the photo to edit, but this is a really good starting off point, and most of my photos, I usually just finish right around here. Sometimes I have a few more tweaks I want to do in Photoshop, and an example of that would be one time I shot a photo of a pavilion, and there was this temperature gauge on there, and I really didn't like how it looked, so I just brought it into Photoshop, selected that temperature gauge, and removed it. No one ever knew the difference. If it's a more complex project, I'll then take it into Photoshop and do even further work. For example, I might remove sun flares from the photo, I might merge the HDR, I might do stuff to make the Milky Way pop more, all kinds of stuff, and I'll be talking about tutorials where you can learn to do all that stuff in just a second. Now I know my process is a little bit vague and underdeveloped, which is actually perfect for you because the best way to learn how to use these softwares, and this takes us into part 2 of the video, is teaching yourself. My friends always ask me, hey Josh, teach me how to use Photoshop. And I tell them you can't teach yourself how to use Photoshop until you actually need to learn how to use Photoshop. And the best way to do it is when you have to edit this photo or make this graphic or whatever, and you come to this situation where you either teach yourself how to do it or it doesn't get done. And when you're in that fight or flight scenario, you learn how to use Photoshop. It's hard to actually just watch hundreds of tutorials on the stuff that is very conceptual and you might maybe use at some point. It's so much easier when you're actually working with your own images and having a project you need to get done. So I could make hundreds of videos teaching you how to do every single little thing in both these softwares, but I've been doing you a huge disservice because you can learn so much faster than I can teach. So I'm going to let you in on a secret. Every single little thing ever possible in Photoshop or Lightroom can be found and taught to you in a tutorial online. So you can find video tutorials, blog tutorials, tutorials on Adobe's website teaching you how to do these little things. And there are so many tutorials, and they're excellent too. As much as I want you to watch my videos, I'd rather you learn at your own rate. Other people are teaching this stuff too, so I highly encourage you go out and look at these tutorials. What I can do to help you along this process is I've come up with 5 steps for finding the perfect editing tutorials. Step 1, when you're first starting off learning these softwares, I recommend sticking only to YouTube videos. So as you get a little bit better, you can move on and go to blogs on websites to just give you step-by-steps in written instructions, which can be much faster, but sometimes you don't know how to use a certain tool, and it's nice to actually watch someone use it. So start with videos, then eventually move to blogs. Step 2, to find the actual tutorial, go onto YouTube or on Google and search how to, and then whatever you want to learn in Lightroom or in Photoshop. And if you're still a beginner, sometimes adding for beginners can help because you'll find more basic, slower tutorials. If you find a tutorial you like, definitely look at that person's other stuff because odds are they have lots of great tutorials. I know this might sound obvious to some of you, but I get a lot of questions on this, so I figure I should be as explicit as possible. Number 3, I found it's much nicer to be working with a tutorial that's too hard and too advanced than one that's too easy and boring and slow, because sometimes it just sucks to watch a 25-minute video on something that you could be taught in 3 minutes. Whereas if a tutorial is just too fast for you, you can always pause it and search up how to do anything they mention that you don't know how to do. I found these tutorial videos are best when you want to do something that requires multiple steps. If you're just trying to figure out how to use one tool, I recommend using Adobe's help section on their website. So just Google Adobe and then how to use Clone Stamp or how to do whatever. And if it's just one simple thing, they usually have a really clear, direct tutorial that'll teach you how to do that. And they're usually fantastic. Number 4, to help you along in this process, I'm working on compiling a list of all of my favorite Lightroom and Photoshop tutorials. I'm going to show all of the ones that I've used in the past that have been really awesome. And I'm also going to search and find more that are good for more beginners and good for intermediate users and all kinds of new stuff. So I'm going to put links to all that stuff down below. And step number 5, and this is where you come into play. Some of you guys, I'm sure, are more advanced at Photoshop and Lightroom than others, and I'm sure you have some great tutorials that you'll probably find. What I'd like you to do is if you find a great tutorial, please leave it in the comments down below and say why it's great, because I'm going to check it out, and if it's really good and I like it too, then I'm going to add it to my list in the description, and then everyone can benefit from these great tutorials you found, and then we can all learn how to use Photoshop and Lightroom together, and it'll be fantastic. When this video drops, there's going to be a nice list of tutorials in the description that'll get you started with these softwares, but hopefully after a week or two of you guys commenting your best ones, we'll be able to compile a really awesome, huge list that'll teach people how to become Photoshop and Lightroom wizards, and that'll be awesome. All right, I think we did it. That is all I have to say. Please let me know in the comments down below, letting me know what you thought of this tutorial, because I'm not really sure what I thought of this tutorial. And feedback is always greatly appreciated. If you want to see more of my photo tutorials, I have a bunch of them. I have a playlist full of them right over here. You should definitely check out. If you want to see more of my photos, I have a portfolio. Link to that in the description. And if you want to follow me on Instagram to see more of my new photos, definitely do that. Link to that right over here. And that, I believe, is everything. Best of luck learning Photoshop and Lightroom. I know it can be challenging at first, but the payoff is so huge once you figure it out, and it's totally worth it. You'll make your photos look more beautiful. You can Photoshop your friends' faces onto dumb stuff. You can put it on your resume because they're 2 valuable skills that people like to hire people for. And all in all, it's totally worth it, so stick with it and you'll figure it out eventually. And that is it, guys. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you eventually. I'm gonna go to class now.